is it feels like OTT constantly gets redefined and labeled in different ways now to describe anything and everything that's either streaming in some capacity for consumers. So I think it'll be a fun discussion that we'll have around what do you guys think about OTT and is it disruptive or not, and if so, how? And so we'll go ahead and get started. Just so everyone knows what the format is, we're going to have the panelists introduce themselves, then we'll go through some Q&A, and if you guys have any questions, just kind of signal me and we'll save them towards the end, so that way we keep everything going for a while. So towards 45 minutes to an hour in, we'll try to do some audience Q&A as well. So if you have a question, just signal me that you want, and I'll call on you as we get some time and break in the action, and then we'll go from there. And I guess there's some reception outside, so we'll make sure we move right on through this and get you guys out to the good stuff afterwards. So, all right, with that, Ivy, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself, what you're doing, your background, and then Robert will go from you and so on, and we'll take it from there. So, Ivy?
Great. Hi, everyone. My name's Ivy Scheibar. I lead business development at a video startup based in New York and Tel Aviv called Echo. Echo is reinventing storytelling with interactive video. My background, I've been lucky enough to do a few different types of roles, operations, BD, marketing, across different media companies, always sort of at the intersection of media and technology. So places like Viacom and AOL and Awesomeness, but it was the years that I spent on the App Store at Apple where I led the entertainment business team and then the games business team, where I really fell in love with the idea that there could be a new kind of media that was basically the best of both. So when I found Echo, I absolutely couldn't wait, and I've been there for about 9 months now. We have tech and content, and ideally bringing those two things together to create a really engaging experience for users and viewers who are able to shape the story as they experience it. And so you'll hear a lot of interactive from me today.
So quick follow-up, can you just give us like one example, one title that you guys have that folks might know about, or sort of what the interaction is? Right.
We've been around for 6 or 7 years. We were originally called Interlude. I think the biggest, the founding team is a band, actually, so we've done a lot in the music video space. So if you've seen anything we've done, it may have been the Bob Dylan Like a Rolling Stone video a few years ago that went viral. And through that experience, you have the song, the Like a Rolling Stone, but you have a cable interface. And what you do is you click through the different channels, and it's as if the song has taken over your TV. However, these days we're more focused on serialized entertainment. We feel like there's such an opportunity with interactivity and serialized entertainment, with users really being engaged in a narrative when they're able to make choices and have the story be shaped by them.
Terrific. Thank you for that follow-up. Robert, you want to introduce yourself?
Right. Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Robert Steele. I lead strategy and operations for a company called Machinima. Machinima is a global programming service focused on exploring the intersection between gaming and entertainment. We have a few different businesses that circle around that ethos. We have our traditional talent network, so we work with a network of creators and influencers who all create videos either about gaming or gameplay or about their lives, mostly on YouTube or Twitch or Facebook. We also create lots of video content, all the way from platforms like YouTube and Facebook and Snapchat and Instagram, all the way up to some of the sort of traditional OTT platforms, buyers like Amazon, Netflix, Hulu, etc. And then the third piece of our business is we work with brands and advertisers who are looking to reach the gamer demographic as well, putting together influencer activations that help drive sort of marketing spend for these companies. Machinima is a wholly owned company of Warner Brothers. It was acquired back in 2016. Is now part of the WB Digital Networks group. I've been in the position for about a year now. Prior to that, I was in the corporate strategy team at Warner Brothers, working on big picture M&A, JVs, investments across the entire studio, including theatrical, home entertainment, TV, DC, you name it, I probably touched it. Digital was a big aspect of my sort of responsibility, which kind of led to me fostering sort of the Machinima relationship and the eventual acquisition. And then prior to that, spent time at Gemstar TV Guide, NBC Universal, and then way back in the day, I was an investment banker at Markovia Securities.
Got it. Came out to Hollywood.
Amazing.
Nice. Awesome. Well, welcome, Robert. David, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey everybody, I'm David Williams. I am the SVP and GM of channels for a new company called Pocket Watch. And we like to say that we are the kids media brand for the mobile generation. Anyone in the audience have kids? Want to raise your hand if you have kids? All right, so do your kids watch YouTube? They watch Netflix? You ever have that experience where you see your kid sitting in front of your 80-inch television looking at a phone or a tablet? Yeah, so we saw that too. And we also, when I say we, our founder is my brother actually, Chris Williams, and we were both at Maker together. He was the chief audience officer, I ran the talent group. And we had a chance to see some of the data. Maker had a network of 60,000 YouTube creators that it ran, so we had this incredible peek into the data, and the data was incredible. What we saw was that most of the audience on YouTube was a kids or family audience. Half the top 10 channels today are kids and family. So we sort of took that lesson and we said maybe there's an opportunity here in the market for a new brand that kids can really emotionally own the way that my generation kind of owned MTV, or millennials maybe owned Nickelodeon. And we say that we're going to be everywhere kids are and celebrate the things that kids love today. We are backed and composed by a team that's really the best of both worlds, the best of digital, the best of traditional. People like Les Moonves have invested in the company. Alan Debevoise, who was the founder, I think, of Machinima. Robert Downey Jr. actually is an investor, so we have Iron Man in our court, which I think is okay. And our team consists of people like Albie Hecht, who was the president of entertainment for Nickelodeon back in the glory days, created SpongeBob, Dora, Blue's Clues, all the sort of glory year shows, Kids' Choice. And then people like my brother and myself, sort of on the digital side, and a great collection of people from the digital business, people from Maker and such. And we're really going to be everywhere kids are. We've got this great cadre of elite partners, people like EvanTube, Ryan Toys Review, the biggest YouTube channel in the world. Ryan does over 1 billion views on YouTube a month himself alone. In fact, we were crunching the numbers the other day because YouTube just came out with unique numbers for the very first time. It only took them 12 years or something. But they came out with these unique numbers, and they're fantastic, and we crunched the numbers around Ryan's uniques, and if you add them all up for the quarter, he is the 3rd largest kids cable network all by himself. He's doing 73 million uniques a quarter.
Great.
So it's a great cadre of partners, and they are owners of the company as well. They have equity, and we've got these long-term deals with them, and we're really building out a vast assortment of businesses. We've got toys, apparel. We just announced today betting and games. We're at Licensing Expo right now. We're going to be big in retail come the fall. We've got shows going to premium SVOD, TV, etc. And so we really see great things for this market. It's exciting for me because I've been doing this for a long time, and I feel like this is a day long coming in terms of actually seeing the sea change in the market. Back in the early 90s, I was doing CD-ROMs. I mean, that's how far back I go.
Okay.
Sold some companies.
That's actually
to
how
Disney,
this show
etc.
started. Was Victor was doing CD-ROMs as well.
That's
So-
right. I think I did Digital Hollywood 1995.
You just officially dated yourself, though.
Yeah, I know.
Well, welcome, David. Fabian, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much for having me. So I'm Fabian. I'm the founder and CEO of W12 Studios. We are a digital design agency based in London. We focus on the media and technology space, on media strategy, on bit of jet lagged, on strategy, product, and brand for our clients. We've been around for 6 years, so we work with clients in 12 different countries on various different propositions in the OTT space. So broadly speaking, we work with content creators. So in the US, we work with broadcasters like CNN and NBC and Fox. We work with emerging content providers like Vivo and Red Bull, developing their direct-to-consumer propositions. We work with a lot of service providers developing OTT platforms. So we did the Go90 experience here in the US. We work with across all the Fios products for Verizon in Europe. We develop various OTT platforms for NOS in Portugal, Telecom Italia, Vodafone, Deutsche Telekom, VEON in Russia. We work on lots of kids apps actually, and we just did a multimedia app called Multimedia, which is maybe also a dated term.
Boy, you guys are really setting the bar high here for us.
Really leveraging the potential of digital to bring entertainment and education together, which is, I think, one of the big opportunities in the space in India. For a Viacom joint venture called Voot. So to make a long story short, we have a very global perspective on the good, the bad, and the ugly of sort of doing media experience right and wrong. When we are there, we always do them right, of course. Personally, I've been in the digital space for 23 years at this point. Wow. Yes, I didn't do CD-ROMs. I did sort of mid-90s with Bertelsmann. I did the AOL acquisition and the Napster deal and so on and so forth. I also worked, prior to joining W12, or founding it rather, I was at the BBC. So I worked on I did design the early iPlayer, so that was what I consider the very first really sort of OTT proposition at scale. And while at the BBC, I looked after BBC News, BBC Sport. I did the first digital London Olympics there. And maybe I should shut up for now and move on.
Yeah. Hey, Fabian, just one quick follow-up.
Yes.
So for your agency, do you guys create all original content, or and is it all brand funded? Just
so we really design the direct-to-consumer experience. So everything around the content.
Okay.
So more specifically, that means our scope of engagement starts with a brand. Or doesn't necessarily start with the brand. It encompasses the brand, the user experience across all the touch points, and essentially everything else that's required in the ecosystem. So from customer acquisition to customer support to marketing. But broadly speaking, we are a design agency.
Okay, great, thank you. Heather, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Heather Johns. I'm the Executive Director of Development at Kevin Hart's Laugh Out Loud Digital Network. It's a joint venture between Lionsgate and Kevin, and it truly is that in every sense of the word. We're really about a content-first initiative. So for us, it's really about IP over IT. So again, when you look at our platform, we do have our owned and operated, but we leverage a lot of other tentacles that are in our kind of ecosystem and network to really just make sure that people are understanding kind of what our content's about, and just to kind of get familiar with what we're really trying to put out there. Predominantly, we're mainly about original content creation, so whether that be a 3-minute piece to an 11-minute to a 22-minute, it just really varies on the form. Kevin's really all about reaching a multicultural millennial demographic, and so we really truly want to deliver on that. We don't really want to be pigeonholed into one section or really just reaching one part of that demographic. So for us, we really kind of want our audience to eventually become what Kevin's audience is, which is global and kind of evergreen for everybody, but everybody can come to the platform and find something that they would hopefully laugh at because we're a comedy channel. Prior to that, I really come up through the Hollywood business side. So I was an agent over UTA and then went over to work at Alloy prior to their merger with Break, and then went to a production company before coming here.
Great. Well, welcome. So that's a little bit about everyone on the panel. Just quick show of hands. How many folks here in the audience consider themselves sort of in the content creation world, whether you're like a writer, a producer, talent, et cetera? Tech or startup kind of world? All right. And then maybe marketing, advertising, any few? Okay. All right, great. So that kind of gives you a sense of who's here. So what we're going to get started with, we're going to go down the row again. I guess maybe we'll go in reverse order to give Heather another shot at this. But the question really stems around OTT. It gets thrown out there, and I feel like it's almost like becoming interplace or interchangeable with, like, it's streaming, it's an app on your phone, it's on Roku, it's on Apple TV, it's on a smart TV. So maybe each of you can take a few minutes and kind of define OTT as you see it, and what does it mean to you, and then sort of give us the commentary on, do you think it's disruptive or not, and sort of if so, how? So,
Sure.
Heather, I'm going to start with you.
I think OTT, when you hear about another service emerging, you're like, okay, great, another one, But I think, for a new platform like ourselves, we've only been live for about 8 months, and I think for us, we really look at it as how to be disruptive in a very disruptive market. I think when you look at television, you look at where you can consume your content, it's kind of an always-on proposition, right? And for OTT, for us, I think that the more choice, the more competition, it just creates disruption because people are able to make really interesting and compelling content. And I think that's the disruptive part, especially from an LOL perspective. We're kind of a niche service in a wide sea of OTTs. You have your big broadcast kind of brand OTTs like Netflix or Hulu or Amazon who kind of cover everything. For us, we're a niche OTT, but I still think that even within this emerging market and all the places you can choose to go and get content, we're one of the destinations that's kind of on the rise. And I think that's interesting about that for us is that, we can make a splash even though there's a lot of people out in this market. So I think that OTT is disruptive, mainly because from the viewer perspective, you're able to consume it wherever, whenever, and however you want to.
Got it, thanks. Fabian.
Well, from my perspective, OTT, it's mostly actually in technical terms, it's delivering content through different means, meaning online. I think when it has become disruptive, obviously, because it enabled to deliver content where traditional technology hasn't been able to deliver content to in a new way. I think when it really becomes disruptive is when we really reach sort of new content formats, and I'm sure you're going to talk about that, and when we sort of start thinking about new monetization models. And that's when I think all the traditional models will really be forced to change quite fundamentally beyond just the distribution, which I think is still what's mostly happening at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. I like those definitions. I think one thing I would focus on, I think it is disruptive in a lot of different ways, is whenever we've seen sort of the emergence of a new medium like this, we've seen the emergence of new brands, and brands that typically have pretty good, strong life cycles and value behind them. And just as we saw, cable gave birth to a lot of new brands that had immense value. When I mentioned MTV and Nickelodeon before, those are brands that really resonated with the new generation. And I think that's a big part of the opportunity that OTT represents today, is the opportunity to create these new brands, whether they be personal brands, like a lot of our creator partners, or broader brands that are more like network or media brands that reach specific audiences. And I think being niche and really focusing in on how do you super serve particular audiences is kind of the path to building that great brand value that could potentially carry you for many decades.
Great. Thanks. Robert?
Yeah, no, the only thing I'll add is that one of the biggest pieces of disruption that we see is that OTT has created sort of a differentiation between platforms. So, for example, you used to be able to make one piece of content and distribute that over. You used to be able to make one piece of content that you could distribute multiple places, right? But now each platform has its own sort of target audience demographic, has its own format and use case and behavior. Some platforms lean more towards mobile use. Some are more engaged with interactive features like chat. So you really have to think specifically about the platforms as you're making content for OTT services.
Is there a particular example that you think of around that?
Yeah, when we, most of our content at Machinima lives on, the social video platforms, so YouTube, Facebook, Twitch. Right. So when we think about live streaming on Twitch, for example, we have to make sure that whatever content we create is interactive, because Twitch users are mostly on their PCs, on their keyboards, chatting, as you see on the sort of the right, scrolling and interacting with the talent on the screen live. Whereas opposed to, you think about YouTube is more of a, VOD experience, mobile experience. Folks are really looking for their quick satiation hits when they have a few minutes here or there. So it's just like those little things you have to think about in terms of the different content formats.
Great, thanks, Rob. Ivy.
Yeah, I agree, and I think we're only getting started. I've been a cord cutter for about 10 years, and I think about just, my Netflix DVDs back then to where I am today and the diet of different content that everyone in my family is consuming, and it's amazing. But still, I think that's what content you're getting and how much you're paying for it and how you're paying for it and what platform. But that's really only scratching the surface in my opinion. And I think part of that is, if you think about where we are today, it's almost like putting radio shows on TV, because we're really only at the beginning of actually seeing the formats change and become able to take advantage of what the internet has to offer. And so when you think about something like Twitch, when you think about something like HQ, and of course, when you think of something like interactive video that Echo's making, these are experiences that offer the viewer something that they can only do on the internet, that they can only do on a one-on-one basis. And so that's where we're really excited to be part of this next level of disruption.
Great, thanks. So there's so many different angles on this topic. I guess I want to start with to app or not to app. Do you need an app to be considered part of the OTT world, or is it just about creating content and trying to just take advantage of other platforms? I know you kind of maybe all have different opinions based off of your clients or your own business and so on, but Fabian, you want to go first? It looks like you're ready.
First.
I feel you're passionate on this subject.
Well, yeah, I mean, from my perspective, you do need an app when you have a direct-to-consumer proposition, when you have your own brand, and if your brand goes beyond your essentially a channel brand and you really have a platform. I think otherwise you're probably better off for a number of reasons going through other people's distribution platforms. So it's at the end of the day a question of scale. And it's a question of your ability to really maintain an app ecosystem successfully in doing all the necessary investments and being able to have a brand that actually stands out. So I think those are the critical parts that inform whether or not to have an app. But just as a last note, in today's digital ecosystem, you cannot just simply have one app. You need to be omnipresent across the entire digital ecosystem if you want to be successful as an app. And that's where the investment comes in. That's where your brand equity comes in, and so on and so forth. That's my position.
Yeah,
David?
I would jump in and say, I think the app or not to app question is a really good one these days. A few years ago, I was a huge proponent of apps in general as sort of an incarnation of these new brands. And I think it's a little more complicated today because you've got such dominance by these horizontal services, Netflix, YouTube, Facebook, etc., Instagram. They're so dominant, they're so vertical, they've got so much power. And I think one of the things that you need to understand as you enter the app space is I think you really need some powerful market reach so you can activate an app. B, you need some really strong differentiation. You need that app to be differentiated highly against those horizontals because they'll just kill you. I mean, it's how do you compete with YouTube from a video app perspective? You've really got to have a strong story. And you need that sort of powerful, I think, brand voice to be able to do it as well. Beyond sort of that, I think you're right, like it's a portfolio play. Figure out like where you can fit into the app landscape opportunistically and see if you can fill those niches and, don't bank on one play being everything.
So do you have an app for what you guys are doing? And how are you, and if so, sort of, or if not, how are you guys starting with your distribution?
Well, we have a strategy around it that definitely we'll lean heavily into the power of our partners. Look, we're just getting started as a brand, right? We don't bring a lot of brand equity to the
Right.
table today. Our brand partners bring enormous brand equity to the table. So a lot of what we're thinking about strategically is how do we do things that are big wins for them and us at the same time. So for instance, our toy line and our clothing line go out and they're Pocket Watch branded, but they also have the brand of our partner front and center. We kind of look at it like Marvel, right? It's Marvel's Iron Man, Marvel's Avengers. And so we're kind of riding their coattails from that perspective while we're bringing them a lot of business. And I think an app strategy can sort of leverage some of those similar dynamics, and that's what you'll see from us. And,
Okay.
and we're also licensing games and doing apps from a licensing perspective where we don't bear much of the risk.
Got it. Excellent. Heather, do you want to chime in on this?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think for Laugh Out Loud, because we do have an owned and operated part to us. You know, we really do have an app and we have a website, and I agree with Fabian. I mean, for us, really, it's about building a brand. You know, to app or not to app, for LOL, it's to app, right? That doesn't mean that we don't leverage our kind of, you know, ecosystem of YouTube and Instagram and Facebook and Snapchat and Twitter and emerging gaming platforms to really kind of distribute our content. But if you're really gonna, for us, it's really to drive people back to our app. So for Laugh Out Loud, it's a key distribution point. That being said, we kind of leverage everything at the same time. But to Fabian's point, it's really for us to build a bigger brand that can transfer internationally and have a real kind of namesake behind it.
Got it. Just one quick follow-up on that. So did you guys think about, you know, anything unique in the experience that you wanted to create as part of that app that you wanted to do?
Yeah, I mean,
Versus
you know,
just like, hey, here's our content. Play
no,
and,
you know, I mean, I think whenever you're developing an app, you definitely have to kind of weigh and play around with what's the user experience that for the audience you're trying to target. And for us, you know, really trying to target a multicultural millennial audience, we realize that live is a huge part to what they're doing. Having real-time comments and things like that. You know, we really tried to make it a very interactive experience, but just as a startup, it's something that we can evolve in our interactiveness, and maybe that's something that we can partner with Ivy on
Yeah.
and get some of their technology in here. You like that plug, Ivy? But, you know, I think for us, it's really about making sure that we're curating our audience and the experience to each audience member that we're trying to reach. And so for us, when we went and made our app and we're revising it now, you know, it's just to make sure that it's the most highly curated kind of experience you can have.
Terrific.
The
All
one-
right. Definitely want to come to you.
The one
Ivy.
thing
Go
I'd
for it.
add on what Fabian said also is I think you can't forget the data piece of this. For those of us who want to have a direct-to-consumer relationship, it's absolutely key. If you are creating great shows and you're giving them to Netflix and Hulu, you're not going to get a lot of data back, and you're not going to really know what's working and what's not working. And I think probably all of us here are still, you know, figuring some things out in terms of our content, and being able to have access to all of that data is really key to figuring out what's working and what's not, and making sure you're headed in the right direction.
Sure. Robert, do you want to add to
Yeah,
this?
just
Yeah, please.
I think the question of to app or not to app really depends on the goal of your business and your brands, as well as the expectations of your stakeholders. If your goal is to get scale and reach in the short term, or maybe exposure for your brand, you're probably better off leveraging some of the existing platforms and the reach that they have. If your goal is to own an audience, then you probably going to have to invest in an app. You're just going to have the expectations that you need, that those apps require the right investment in order to persuade consumers to spend time away from the thousands of other apps that are out there and spend more and more time on your app. So.
Got it. So you guys have touched on a number of different pieces here. I guess I want to tie it back now to maybe your either recommendations or your point of view around sort of the formats that are working, the genres that are working, the lengths that are working, the interactivity that's working. Can you guys maybe comment on some of that? And Ivy, I'm going to start with you if you don't mind.
Sure. I think from my perspective, I think it's too early, frankly, to say genres or lengths aren't working. I think it depends on who the audience is and what platform you're talking about. I think you could find examples of everything that work. So I think what I'd say to that is I think I think it was you, Robert, who was saying that you need to be mindful of what is going where, and we're not in a world where you can make one piece of content and put it everywhere anymore. So but I don't think there are any sort of, any areas that just don't work.
Well, so just maybe a follow-up on that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what you're doing is interactive, right? And it requires a certain type of technology to be implemented. So,
Yep.
I mean, does that mean you have to have sort of the Echo
You
app?
have
or,
to have, you don't
or the
necessarily have to have the
Tech,
Echo
or-
app. You have to have the Echo player, but lucky for us, we are very easily integrated across apps, web, et cetera. So
What about
we're-
like Roku and those kind of devices?
those
are-
as well.
okay.
There's an integration that has to happen, but it's actually not not too heavy. And you know, in some ways, I feel like I'm back at the beginning where I'm asking people to take our player. But in this world, I think our content, because of the insane engagement that we see from users, and also what the problems and some of the issues that the interactivity solves for advertisers, I think there's a real differentiation there that makes it worthwhile.
Got it. Heather, and then maybe Fabian,
Yeah,
saying
no.
on just kind of the formats and what's
Yeah,
working.
no, I'm like chomping at the bit of this question because this is something we talk about daily at
Well,
Laugh
then
Out
let's
Loud.
table you for, no.
Exactly.
Please, chime in.
I think for Laugh Out Loud, we can kind of expand and contract our content and kind of the genres and the length depending on the specific format, the show specific, and kind of where we're distributing it, right? So if it's going to run first run on our platform and a secondary run on Facebook, we'll optimize it for that. A great example is Lyft Legend, where Kevin Hart goes undercover as a Lyft driver, right? Those episodes are 11 minutes total in length, and we actually optimized it for Facebook, and so we cut them down into about 4-minute segments, and I think that for Laugh Out Loud, the great part about it is we're not forcing content creators to be a part of a runtime. They're not forced into a 22-minute or an 8-minute or a 6-minute. It just really depends on the type of content. And so even within a series, it can range anywhere between 8 to 12 minutes in runtime, depending on each episode. So for Laugh Out Loud specifically, I think what we've realized is that genres like Cold as Balls, which is a huge hit for us, an interview show where it's very simple. The premise is an athlete and a comedian get into an ice bath. It's the simplest premise really works for our platform and our audience. So that's what we have.
That sounds like a great show. by the way.
It's epic. If you haven't watched it, you should.
I'm adding it to my list. Fabian?
Yeah, I think, I definitely agree that that's way too early to say whether something works or doesn't work. And I think in general, everything will work because that's the beauty about digital. It sort of is an enabler. And it's the limitation is really about what you want to do. And I think there are two critical parts that are important to keep in mind as you sort of define your proposition. One is, once again, brand. By the way, you can never go wrong answering a question with a brand. But actually it's true. I think it's incredibly important, more than ever, in the digital world where essentially everything is accessible within a few clicks or whatever, that you exactly, as a content provider, that you know what you stand for, that your audience knows what you stand for. I think that's one thing that has always been very important in TV and the channel model, and continues to be even more important, I think, in the online world. So that matters. And then the other part is almost to the other side of the same coin, is a context. So we always think about, when we think about it, designing an experience, so there's user-driven design, which is fantastic, but we think it's context-driven design, where really we need to understand where's the user, who's the user, how much time do they have, et cetera, and that's going to inform whether you want to serve something that's 2 hours long or something that's 3 minutes long, and there's room for everything. So I think those are the things you need to consider as you move forward, and obviously there's an enormous room to innovate around new content formats and around new monetization models, and I think that will break down a lot of these barriers that we see right now.
One more thing, I think
Sure.
it also depends on where your audience is finding you. Are they consuming you on your mobile? Are they consuming you on what mode or platform they're consuming you on? With Laugh Out Loud, predominantly we have about 90% mobile viewership. So for us, I think we're optimizing a little bit more towards that audience by creating content that's a little bit, or the runtime is not your typical 180-minute movie,
Heather, is all your stuff streamed, or is it downloadable as well?
For now, we're a streaming platform, so none of our content is downloadable yet.
Got it. Okay. David, what about you? Just thoughts on just formats and what's working in that space?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think a couple of things that matter right off the bat are where you are in sort of your life cycle. In other words, we work with these partners and they've already got these massive audiences. So they have a lot of versatility and a lot of flexibility when it comes to formats. Because they've got audiences that love them, they're going to tune into them no matter what. If you're in a building mode, and a lot of them built their channels based on things that look a lot like wish fulfillment in the kids space. They play with a lot of toys. They unbox a lot of toys. There's a surprise to the unboxing format that's very compelling. Or they do, they have their family in the videos, and I think a lot of the audience aspires to kind of have a happy family and have, a mom and dad that don't mind playing with the kids and sort of being big kids themselves. So we see a lot of wish fulfillment there. As we're hustling for audience against new channels, what we see is it's really important to think about discovery from the standpoint of what is trending at the moment, what can I do from a topic standpoint, from a content standpoint that will plug into that SEO of what's happening. And so, right now it might be a wheel of slime that's working in our space. So we're going to do wheel of slime video. And it also is important to be true to the format that you're doing and to, in a lot of ways, ape what's working, because what's going to happen is the algorithm is going to suggest videos to the viewer that are similar to the video that they already knew and engaged with. So you want to be in a place where you sort of look like that. And so you see a lot of repetition and a lot of sort of uniformity among different channels as they're all aping similar formats and aping what's working. And so that's what we do as well to help build audience.
Robert, just one maybe last comment on the subject from you. I'd love to get a sense from, because what's fascinating about this panel for me is like you guys all come from a different angle with a different set of types of content and so on. So it's kind of fascinating to hear the different points of view. Robert, with the gamer point of view, does that mean like everything's really extended play and long form?
I agree with some of the previous folks of saying that it's too early to tell kind of what genres work, but different things work on different platforms. The one piece I'll add, though, is that the definition or the line between sort of like what you think of as like A-list Hollywood talent and top-tier creators has shrunken. And sometimes, some of our creators are just as big, if not bigger, than some of the Warner Brothers talent that we're used to working with, which is interesting when you think about just working with the talent. It's for folks under the age of 25, they're the guy that they watch stream Fortnite on Twitch every day is just as big a star as Michael Jordan was to myself, right? And they also have a different expectation of that talent, where they expect to be able to, through these platforms, interact with the talents either through comments or through chat, versus a more sort of old school model. So just interesting.
And just taking off on that point, I think it brings up another topic that's so important, which is what we see so strongly, and whether this is operating on a conscious level with the audience or a subconscious level or both, is that power of the one-to-one engagement. That the audience feels they're typically watching on a device, right, where they're engaging in communication with their friends and family, they're engaging through messaging apps, they're engaging through FaceTime and such, and there is this strong, incredible power of looking right into the camera and addressing the audience like they're right there in the room with you, like they're a good friend, and cluing them into the in-jokes and making them feel like we're there. We've actually been telling our talent recently to just pretend like it's a live interactive show with your best friends. Look right into the camera, talk right to them, and be intimate about the jokes and what's happening. And I think that's true for a lot of the platforms. And it's a really key part of what makes some of these formats work.
Yeah, I think it's easy to forget that we've all learned not to interact with video, right? When you watch a show with a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old, they're wanting to touch it and they're yelling at it and they're expecting it, and we say, shush, 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 don't touch, because they touch it and they get a pause button and it doesn't do anything. Like that's all learned. And so, what happens when you have a generation who has learned that they can touch and interact with everything else? Well, they're going to expect that from their video too.
That's right. So we have to make money out of all of this. So how do we do that? How do you actually make money in all of this? Heather, you're smiling, so. Do you make money? Do you intend to make money at this?
I think everybody wants to make money
by
doing
Paramount?
this. I think, I think that everybody wants to make money doing this. I think that you've got a bunch of different models. Obviously, you've got your ad-supported, your free model. You've got kind of a subscription-based model. I mean, I think that what's interesting about that is you look at, kind of different platforms, where they are in their life cycle, and where they are as far as their transition to making money. For Laugh Out Loud, I think we're mainly an ad-supported platform right now. We do have experiential opportunities that are coming up this year, which is going to be exciting for us. And selling content off platform is another distribution point for our business model. But I think eventually we're going to start exploring what a subscription would look like for us. But I think that there's a lot of different ways to cut it, and I think that a lot of different people are doing well. When you look at Amazon and them being able to really contribute 55% of different people's subscription base as just an add-on channel, that's a great subscription add-on for a new platform like myself. But I think that you just have to really make sure it really fits where you are in your life cycle of your content and your app.
Robert, you want to touch on this one?
Yeah, so from a Machinima standpoint, all of our content lives on other people's platforms because we made the decision that we wanted to go where gamers were and not necessarily pull them to where we wanted them to be, because we just thought that was an uphill battle we didn't want to fight. So we sort of, work with the traditional sort of platform models. Of course, they either license content from us, or we have rev share deals with some of our talent when they live stream. Or we put together, we reach out to brands and put together activations for those brands who are looking to reach that sort of gamer demographic.
Ivy, what about you? How do you guys make money?
First, I think from my experience in mobile games, I think it's been shown really clearly that when you offer different ways to your user base to monetize themselves, you can have a lot of success. And so I think for us at this point, we are mainly ad-supported. Part of that comes from our belief that the ability that we have to, serve a contextual ad to someone who's in an Echo experience. We know the path they've taken. We know the state they're in emotionally because of where they are in the show, and we can serve them something specific. And from a brand perspective, we also know there's a human engaging. That's not a bot, because that whole player is on the page. So we feel like we answer a lot of questions for brands and for users there. But that doesn't stop us from trying different things. One of our experiences, we did a reboot of War Games with MGM, where we've got that available on Steam. Steam's not an ad-supported platform at this point, so we have that out for $2.99 there, even though you can still get it ad-supported on our app and on the web. So we're still in the mode of trying and seeing what sticks on exactly what kinds of shows.
Good. Fabian, and then maybe David?
Yeah, I think from a design perspective, I agree. What I see with some of our clients that we work with, you do want to hedge your bets unless you really have a scale to build an SVOD model, and there are very, 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 very extremely few who can actually successfully do it. And if you're not one of those few, I think your best model is, if you have to rely on advertising, your engagement matters, and being able to increase engagement matters as much as sort of developing really clever monetization opportunities in new ad formats. So I think, but to increase engagement requires some very careful content strategy, really think about very carefully about how you want to curate your experience so you can keep the audience engaged, because the longer you keep them engaged, the more you can monetize them. It's quite simple. And that's obviously easier to do in your own ecosystem than it is to do in somebody else's ecosystem. And I think, right now everything's quite binary between sort of the YouTubes and the social platforms and the SVOD. In the future, there's probably a strong need for some shades of gray where there's some sort of hybrid model, some new ways of rebundling content and allowing everybody to sort of monetize the content in a new way than what we see right now.
David, final thought on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think building a business on, certainly a social video platform is, and probably SVOD platforms as well, is risky and challenging. For our partners, they've got a low-cost structure, so it's less risky and challenging, and they can be very profitable. But for a company, the way I look at it is, again, I sort of compared us to Marvel in the past, and I look at YouTube and social media as our comic books. Like, we do it well, we can have a nice business there. But the power is in the reach. The power is the ability to find fans and build community and do it at massive scale. And if we do that, if we can build a passionate community around something, then all sorts of business models are open to us. Then we're doing toys, apparel, and amusement park rides. And so that's how we look at it, is that social video is there to help activate passionate fan bases that we can then monetize through myriad businesses. And I think that's kind of the long-term way to do it. Build the brand, build the passionate fan base around it, and monetize along diverse streams.
Okay. So what data do you guys look at? What data matters in this OTT world? Who wants to go first? Ivy, you're snickering.
Yeah. I'm not
You guys must collect a lot of
Yeah.
data because you get the interactivity.
We do,
so.
exactly. That's why I think, we look at probably the same sorts of things that everyone looks at in terms of how our users are getting to our video and, what the most engaged users look like. But I think where we're different is there's a lot of in-video metrics we're looking at in terms of how early and how often someone's engaging, how, what choices are they making? Are we, on a given show, good choices mean that not everyone's picking the same thing, right? So there are plenty of other metrics that we're looking at that are within the video itself, so that we know we're creating a great experience that's really engaging to lots of different kinds of people. For us, it's key that we're getting people engaging immediately and that they're staying engaged, and we're seeing that behavior throughout the whole thing.
That's great. Fabian, do you want to comment on this?
Well, we are designers. Well, we often, that sounds like an excuse. But
so you don't use data.
there's, I mean, for us the challenge is always with many of the experiences that we design to really translate the data into meaningful user experiences. And I think there's a few tensions that we always have to resolve. I mean, firstly, it's very often the data that you really need, which is to really drive recommendations, things like that, is not very often easily accessible to many content providers for a number of reasons. And the other challenge we have is actually less is more actually really matters. I think there tends to be an overload of information and choice in general when people craft user experiences. So I think the key is to filter the data and really identify what actually really matters and then translate that into meaningful user experience. That's what matters for us in terms of data. I'm sure there are lots of other things where data really matters if you want to sort of serve the right advertising and so on and so forth. But I think for us, the really knowing what to do with the data and then sort of creating experiences that solve some of the key pain points that we have in digital design, that's the challenge.
Yeah. Robert, how do you deal with this? Because, I mean, everyone's kind of pointing to the example of, like, you don't get a lot of data back from some of these distribution partners. So how do you deal with that since all your content's out there?
Yeah, no, it's definitely a problem, and the data sets that you get from different platforms can be completely different. But one thing that there's a priority for Machinima that we're big into is actually social listening. So there's a lot of tools out there that help you basically crawl through public conversations that we use to pull in insights around sort of what's the social conversation around a certain piece of IP or around a certain brand to better help us inform our programming or marketing decisions. That's a tool that we've continued to sort of expand and build out expertise in that applies across a bunch of our businesses.
Do you want to add one more thought on this?
Yeah, sure.
Sure.
I think, we look at a whole lot of things. We look at click-through to see how well our metadata and thumbnails are doing on YouTube, which is a big focus of ours. We look at initial view velocity, right, sort of what you were alluding to. How fast are we getting an audience to something? Subscriber tune-in, what percentage of the subscriber base is coming in? And then things like retention, how much watch time are we getting out of that view? Those are real big ones.
Got it. So I want to kind of come back to something, and Robert, I'm going to start with you this time. So you guys have all touched on certainly building a brand, and sort of it begs the question of like, how do the studios handle, going direct to consumer when, in the past it's always been through distribution channels and partners and wholesalers and so on. So maybe, Robert, can you kind of touch on your experiences now, kind of, coming from Warner Brothers now over to the direct to consumer world? How's that shift going and so on? And
it's a shift. It's interesting because you think about a company like Warner Brothers. Is traditionally more of a B2B business. Warner Brothers creates content that they then sell to other businesses who then sell to the consumers. That model is completely turned on its head when you think about direct to consumer, and you have to think about all the things that come with trying to engage and own an audience that historically a company like Warner Bros. Didn't have to think about. So part of the charge for Machinima and some of the rationale behind the acquisition was helping sort of relay some of the expertise that Machinima has built over the years as being somewhat direct to consumer, on these digital platforms to Warner Brothers as it starts to think about, getting closer to its audiences.
Heather, do you want to add on to this? I mean, you're sort of being forced to build a brand from scratch here and deal with all the challenges of a direct to consumer business.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question, especially for somebody like Laugh Out Loud, who we do sit within a studio because it is a joint venture within a studio and a huge personality. But at the same point in time, I think that Lionsgate specifically has looked at the direct-to-consumer business and made very strategic moves in that space. You look at like the acquisition of Starz, which has a huge direct-to-consumer business with their app, and some of the other SVODs that they've launched successfully. I think that it's interesting for us to be in this position, but what's great about that is that we do kind of, to your point, have an opportunity to create this amazing content and get kind of the access to the creators and the writers and the talent that a studio provides to you, but we're able to kind of really funnel that in as opposed to waiting if it's going to get picked up or how long that process is going to be. We have a real opportunity to kind of accelerate the process and really get really amazing, innovative, cool content out there in partnership with Lionsgate in a great way.
Okay. David, do you want to touch on this one? I mean, so you guys are almost, 100% direct to consumer, right? Building a brand?
Well, we build, right now, most of our audiences are built on social platforms and stuff. We haven't really launched a direct to consumer business yet, and sort of, I think there's we want to do it very carefully.
Got it. So do you think, and maybe for anyone, is direct-to-consumer the path forward? Is that the wave of the future? Or will the industry sort of be dependent on license deals and licensing content out to partners and so on? Or is it just there's a healthy balance of that?
I would just say that building an OTT service, and I say this with respect because I know that you're doing it, it's a tough time to be doing it. I think that's why you really have to be very, very thoughtful about all that differentiation and how much you're willing to invest in it, because what's happening in the space is so amazing right now, right? You've got these like virtual MVPDs now that are coming on, like YouTube TV and Sling and Hulu Live and DirecTV Now, and then you've got Amazon with its channels initiative. Apple hasn't even really made its play yet, but we know it's like about to come. And so what these giant companies are doing in the space is pretty amazing and massive. And so to be launching direct-to-consumer services that in some ways are duplicative of what they're doing, I think is something that you just have to be very, very cautious about. And so we look at it opportunistically. What can we do in the game space? What can we do that's sort of very niche-y around that, as opposed to sort of doing an OTT direct-to-consumer? I just think it's going to be tough.
Ivy, what do you think?
I think, I mean, the long play, I think ideally you want both. I think for us, we would love both. You know, eventually, do we see lots of places, you know, we're already hearing Netflix is starting to experiment with interactive video. Do we want Echo Video, all those places, but also have our owned and operated that's differentiated? Yeah, there's a way to make that work. I think part of that strategy for us in a weird way is, you know, we've got web-based creation tools that are out and open to the public, and that's, you know, for us, you know, in creating a new medium, part of what's been helpful is we've attracted creators who just want to try stuff out, and some of that's, you know, taken off because a gaming influencer finds it and says, what the heck is this? I've never, you know, seen anything like this before. And lo and behold, you know, that's a new audience that we've got that we can then bring to our owned and operated. So I think it's such an exciting time because the audiences are everywhere, and coming to different kinds of video in different places, that I think there's going to be so many opportunities that ideally it's hybrid in the long term.
So what you guys can all thank David for bringing up this topic, but I'm going to bring it up for him. What's the hardest thing you're facing now as part of launching into OTT? And Heather, I'm going to ask you to start first.
You know, I think the hardest thing in launching into OTT for us has just been keeping up with the demand that our audience is expecting from us. You know, I mean, obviously, our audience is a hyper-engaged audience. We went after a very niche audience specifically because we knew that given our auspices and our partners that were attached, they were going to be voracious for those types of content, and it's kind of like we can't get it out quick enough, you know? So I think that's something that we need to kind of amplify on our end, but I think that, you know, it's kind of like every other OTT when you're starting out. You need to just build a lane for yourself and make sure that people know who you are.
Yeah, Fabian.
So, I mean, again, as being on service side and sort of seeing what I see with our clients, I would say there are two key challenges. One is keeping up in many different ways. Keeping up in terms of maintaining the infrastructure that you need to support. So I think if you have an OTT service, you ideally you need to be omnipresent, and you need to be able to have a consistent presence across all these different touch points, which are consistently changing. So that's a huge challenge to keep up over time. And the other part is, of course, is the monetization challenge, and actually doing this in a way that you're profitable. So I think if you sort of look at the world really hasn't changed, I think, in the sense they're content creators and they're content distributors. Yeah, there's some who do both, but broadly speaking, I think you fall in one or the other. So when we say OTT, it's kind of, I always think, like, which side are you going to be on? I think if you're on the content creator side of things, you're going to have monetization opportunities, and if you're in the distribution side of things, you're going to have keeping up problems. So that's sort of how I look at that challenge.
Robert?
Yeah, just on the social video side, it really is trying to keep ahead and keep up with the platform changes, the algorithm changes, the audience tastes, kind of like what Heather said, just making sure you're producing enough content and paying attention to how that performs. Given that you're sort of fighting against, you know, the millions of hours that's created on these platforms, you know, every hour. So.
David?
Yeah, I mean, I want to first just make a distinction between direct-to-consumer and OTT.
Yeah.
OTT, you know, in terms of getting into some of these services, the new virtual MVPDs, shows on Netflix, Roku, there's actually more opportunity than ever. I actually think in a lot of ways it's less hard than it's ever been. And we've got this incredible proliferation of enabling technologies as well that are cheaper and more efficient and reliable and all that stuff. So getting there is really easy in a lot of ways. I think for us, you know, one of the big challenges is we program right now to services that are very niche, where we understand a specific consumer very well. And when we go to OTT and we think about like how we live in that environment, it's got to be broader. So how do we translate this kind of very niche programming initiative into something broader that's going to have a happy home on OTT services? And you know, do we day part things by demographic or interest based? I think it's a lot of those kinds of questions. But the good news is that OTT hopefully will give us some metrics and whatnot to help us refine as we go.
That's great. Ivy, did you want to
Yeah.
add to that?
Sure. I think to Fabian's point, we are trying to do content and distribution, and so that's, you know, doing that together is hard. But I think the challenge for us is scale in every way. Not only you know, do we have creators who are really interested in making great interactive, but there's a learning curve there. We have advertisers who are really interested in what this can bring, but we still need to get our distribution so that we've got the reach that they're expecting. So there are all these pieces. Like any good startup, I feel like we're flying the plane as we're building it. So it's a little bit of everything.
That's great. All right, so we're at a good point to maybe take a few questions from the audience. So if you have a particular question, I ask you to just like kind of raise your hand. I'll call on you, and if you can say your name, your company, and your question kind of quickly, we can take a few questions. Anyone? Sir in the front, name, company, and question.
Sure. Hi, my name is Anise Taylor from Higher Than Summer Productions. We're based out of Philadelphia. My question is for you, ma'am. You mentioned about the content and distribution is hard. What do you find as the hardest part in the development process of the content and then into distribution?
Let's see. I think at this point for us, because this interactive video has been around for a long time, we feel like our tech allows it to be done in a really seamless way that makes it look and feel premium for the first time. So we've got a lot of creators who are interested, which is fantastic. However, because we're at the forefront of this new medium, we're very, very careful about what goes out. And you know, the last thing we want are a bunch of sort of so-so experiences where people say, oh, this isn't that special. So I think for us, it's being careful about who we're working with and getting them, you know, really understanding what we've learned in the years we've been making interactive video about what sort of choices matter, right? Like taking the elevator versus taking the stairs is not a very interesting choice for a viewer. You know, if it's much more impactful if there's emotional weight to it. So there's all these sort of creative guidelines that we've developed that we need to bring our creators along with us to really make great content, since we're right at the beginning.
That's great. Any other questions? We have time for, yeah, name, company, and question.
I'm Phil Ranta from Mob Crush. I'm wondering how you handle user acquisition as it pertains to OTT. I know that some of you are working with influencers, so I assume that a lot of it is them shouting out through their social platforms, hey, come check me out. But for those of you who are working with people who are not as much of a two-way conversation with their audience, how do you get people to watch your stuff?
Fabian, do you want to take that? Because you were mentioning you touch on some of that with your clients. So, and then maybe Heather, quick.
Yeah, I mean, you know, most of our clients are content creators in that respect, so it's less about marketing. So there it's really taking a step back and looking at the overall ecosystem and looking how and where audiences are likely to engage with the different kinds of content, and then making sure that you essentially serve them the right content at the right time. So for instance, we worked with Red Bull, doing very carefully looking at the user journeys from social into their own ecosystem, and broadening out the overall content portfolio that they have, so it's not so narrow. So for instance, if there's a particular skateboarding event, it's not only about skateboarding, but it's about the place, it's about the personality, it's about the fashion, it's about the music. So you can broaden it out, so you can enable longer and more engaging user journeys, and that's how you essentially acquire the audience. So it's a bit more tedious, I guess.
Heather, do you want to quickly add something to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think for, you know, us specifically, Laugh Out Loud, we obviously have a huge marketing tool in our biggest partner ever, our co-founder, the founder, the CEO of it. But also, I think, you know, we try to really engage with creators, whether they be influencers or traditional talent, who are interested in creating thought-provoking content. For instance, we were able to grow our YouTube channel we were able to double our YouTube channel in the course of a month, and that's just through great content, right? That's through recognizable faces. Again, to reference our show Cold as Balls, but not to be a broken record, but we premiered that, and that came out with Kevin and LeVar Ball, and I know everybody knew who LeVar Ball was as like a walking kind of talking soundbite, but I think it kind of added a human element to him, and I think that if you have great content, that really will help you. And so I think that for Laugh Out Loud, we're really trying to double down on making sure that all of our content has a premium feel and that it's something that's driving it and not something that's a little bit of a throwaway. So that's kind of our approach.
Terrific. We have time for maybe one more question. Anyone else? I'll ask one. I'm chock full of them today. You guys all kind of mentioned a few different things. You kind of, you touched on it around, data driving recommendations, algorithms, and so on. Do you guys want to kind of comment on sort of the, challenges, opportunities around like how you deal with the data or the metadata around the content that's going to help drive, I guess, discovery and surfacing of that content for folks? You guys are all shaking your head like, man, don't give me this one. David.
That's a whole
David's
panel.
David is coming to you. You get 2 minutes.
That's a whole panel right there.
I know.
I think you need to find good people. There are some tools that we use on YouTube, like vidIQ, and we use Tableau a little bit to do some data analysis. A lot of it is, though, just scouting around, just like, here's a good trick. You open an incognito browser window and you see what's being recommended against a piece of content. Your piece of content, somebody else's piece of content, and you look at that suggested stream and you try to think how you're going to fit into it. How you're going to fit in from a thumbnail perspective, a metadata perspective, and then a format and a content perspective, and topic. So, I think it takes a lot of diligence, but a lot of the fundamentals are pretty obvious.
Got it. Ivy, do you want to touch on that one? Or?
I think what, specific to us, we're still working out. There's a challenge that we have that I think goes to discoverability, which is, interactive video. Either you've had an experience, in the 90s and it was horrible, or it doesn't mean anything to you. And so I think for us, one of the challenges that we have in terms of discoverability is we're still figuring out how to talk about this, right? So I mentioned we're on Steam, to a gamer, our experiences won't feel like a game. To someone who's used to watching video, it'll feel a little bit more gamey. And so, not only do you have to get the message right, but you have to get the message right to the different audiences on the right platforms where they are. And so that's not anything that you're ever done with. No matter whether you're inventing new terms or not, that's something that's an ongoing process.
Robert, do you want to touch on that as well, just as it relates to kind of having to deal with the third-party distribution?
Yeah, I think it's it's hiring good people that can quickly find out what stats
Job
matter the most to each platform. And sometimes that can change on a weekly or monthly basis. But quickly finding out kind of is what Dave was saying, like on YouTube, looking at suggested videos. When you're on Twitch, you're looking at sort of total watch time and subscribers and tips or donations or things of that nature. So it's really, digging down to sort of the brass tacks as quickly as possible, so you don't drown in the volumes of unnecessary data.
Great. So I just want to ask you guys all one last question, really, which is sort of a closing comment. So, and maybe it's your, kind of realizing who's in the audience in terms of like they're into content creation, some startups, some folks in advertising. What's your best piece of advice centered around OTT that you can provide them? And Heather, I'm going to pick on you first. We'll just come down the line this way, if you don't mind.
Sure. I mean, I think it's kind of the same thing I've been saying across a lot of other answers, but content is really king. And I think that we sit in a unique position where we do have access to amazing talent, writers, producers, whatever, being a part of the studio system. But really it's about creating content. And for us, it's about IP over IT. So making sure that our content really is something that can translate across multiple platforms, whether that stay in a digital space or go to linear. But for us, it's all about making sure that you have amazing content that people are compelled to watch.
That's great. Fabian?
Yeah, I wholeheartedly. Content is king. Once again, you can never go wrong there.
It's so easy. Just create great content.
No, but
Problem there.
I think if I would give advice for the future, I look back sort of one of the key things that where I saw a missed opportunity consistently with many of the people that we work with is that it didn't really fully leverage brand. And I think it's not about IT. I completely agree. IT is not interesting to anybody other than the guys who actually do the plumbing. So if you are in the business of content, you need to be able to create brand equity somehow. Whether that's, wherever that brand equity resides, doesn't really matter. But at the end of the day, it's not about an individual piece of content, it's about the holistic world of content you create. And that's when you're going to create opportunities. And I think if you get that right, the whole OTT and whatever it's going to be a secondary problem.
Yeah, I can echo that a lot. I mean, I sort of have a little bit of a pat answer here, which is I always say, find an audience and make them love you every day. And it sounds
You guys are making this way too easy.
I know, it sounds really pat, but what I mean is, I think as a content creator, it's very easy to get kind of very intro sort of spective about things and be thinking from an artistic standpoint about what do you want to see and what's going to fulfill your vision, and we can get myopic about it. And taking off those blinders and really looking like who's the audience that's really responding, or who's the audience that's really going to respond here? What else are they responding with? How can I make them happy every day? And really kind of putting yourself, really empathizing with your potential audience, understanding who they are, where they are, what you're doing that they like, and just honing in on that, because it goes back to brand equity. That's how you're creating brand equity, basically. And I think that's the essential tool.
Terrific. Thank you. Great advice. Robert?
I echo the same sentiments. I was going to say, you got to find your audience, stick to it, get to know them really well. The brands that have succeeded and built large audiences on sort of digital platforms know exactly who they're trying to program against on a daily basis. So maintaining that focus is key.
Terrific. Ivy?
I'll add one last platitude to this list of advice, which is along the same lines. You have to be creating something so good, not that I'll share it on Facebook, but that I will literally turn to Robert and say, oh my God, did you see this thing? Because that's really, if you can do that, then the rest of the stuff gets really easy. So that's just make great content.
Terrific. Well, thank you.
Tenacity helps too.
Thank you, guys. So we're going to wrap up. Thank you guys all for coming. How about a big round of applause for Ivy, Robert, David, Fabian, and Heather. Thank you guys all so much. Thank you.
Yeah.
You guys survived. Thank you.